Okay.
Mine's garage sale.
I should have gone with her.
Good, how you doing?
Good.
You busy?
Oh, yeah. Really busy. How are you?
Hi, Kathy.
If you need something to eat or drink, just come to the kitchen and I'll help you out.
Okay.
You got the payments fine.
If it's all right with you, I'm just gonna pull up a chair here. This is a very intimate setting, so I hope you don't mind. Well, you may be wondering what I'm doing here on a Friday morning, but we're in our August work break. Some people call it recess. I call it the district work period because I'm out getting around to all the 16 counties here in the 3rd district. So this district, for some of you who may not know, is you go from Potawatomi County over to Polk County, just down the Interstate 80 east, and then down to the Missouri border. 16 counties. We've got the most populated county in the state in this district, which is Polk County, and the least populated county in the state is in this district. Does anybody know what county that is?
Adams.
Adams. You win a coffee and a cookie. Or a donut.
He's a state guy, I'm a county guy.
Right. So we'll go back in session just after Labor Day. So I'll do some parades and do some more town hall meetings and visit with farm bureaus and whoever wants to meet, and then we'll go back. So I'm from Van Meter, so that's in Dallas County. It's a town of about 1,000. Not much has changed since I grew up there, but that's home, and I sleep a lot better in Van Meter than I do in DC, that's for sure. And you can see the stars. But how I like to do this is I like to just kind of go around the room really quick and just give me your name and the issue you want to talk about, and then I'll write them down, and then we'll go around and we'll talk about those and answer any questions on them. So there's a lot of issues, and maybe some of you are very passionate about them, and I hope you are. But I hope that we can all just be mindful that we are Iowans and we are respectful, and let's go.
Okay, yeah, I'm Melvin Hauser, I'm the Potawatomi County Supervisor, I live down east of Macedonia. I sit on the National Association of Counties Board of Directors and very involved in national county issues. Can we talk about the Federal Highway Trust Fund and transportation?
You bet.
And I'd like to, while I got a chance, to invite you back to the county just so we can look at some transportation, talk about maybe also Veterans Affairs and some issues that involve county government.
Sir, thank you.
Hi, I'm Frank Rice. I'm with the League of Human Dignity in Council Bluffs, and I'd be interested in what is happening with the upcoming Social Security disability cuts.
Thank you.
I'm Lynn Grovey, Potawatomi County Supervisor, and I'm just here to give you support. I think you're doing a wonderful job, and you're always out there trying, so I'm here to support you.
Well, thank you.
I'm Greg Forstall, local member of the Iowa House of Representatives, and I'd like to hear a little more about states' rights and the overreach of federal hands into our responsibilities.
Okay.
I'm Joy Young, and I'm a registered nurse, and so I'm interested in healthcare. I'm also interested in what's going on with nursing right now, because if you read the breaking news this morning, the American Nurses Association has voted to do away with nursing diagnoses, which has a lot to do with the way we do our work. It also was a very cumbersome thing to have to do. So I'll be interested to see what happens with that in the coming days.
Okay.
I'm Marilyn McMartin. I'm the administrator for the Potawatomi County Veteran Affairs Office. We work with the Van Meter, Iowa Cemetery, so you probably see that as you go home every day. And my concern is the Veterans Choice Program, how problematic we're having with that program, that they're allowing the veteran to choose where to go, but really they're not. So I have some concerns with veterans benefits.
Okay.
Francis Rollins. I came mostly to listen, but I am interested in Social Security.
Okay.
Jim Sutton, I'm superintendent at Riverside Schools, and I'd like to talk about education.
Okay.
Kathy Grosvenor, retired educator, and I guess I'm here just general listening.
Okay.
I'm young and roads is a big problem, I think.
Kind of goes along with the highway.
Yes.
Highway bill, highway issue.
Yeah, all my kids don't need to introduce themselves. I'm Mandy Reynolds, and they're all taking a government or economics class this year, and so we kind of came for the opportunity to just see kind of how something like this runs, and they're interested to learn, so thank you very much.
Well, I like to do these, we call them coffee with your congressman. They seem more intimate, and hopefully they bring more people out because we're giving away coffee and donuts, so that helps. But I do these town hall meetings in every county, and I think it's just very important to make sure that you, the people, have an opportunity to get to know who your employee is. That would be me, because you're the boss. I mean, you're the people who vote in members of Congress, whether it's a member of Congress or it's a board of supervisor or somebody in the state legislature. So I think it's very important that we have that interaction. And I get a lot out of it because I get to know what's going on in the pulse of the counties and the district. And so it's a two-way street, in my opinion. And I think you should demand that kind of accountability and interaction with those who work for you. We'll start with the highway bill. So when we get back, one of the issues that we'll take up is the highway bill. Now, we've done 34 short-term patches on the highway bill. We need a long-term highway bill, 5 to 7 years in my opinion. Now the question is, how do you fund this? Because there's consensus on both sides of the aisle that we need a longer-term bill to provide some certainty out there. It helps with our roads, of course, and getting safe roads and making sure we get our exports, our goods to market to export, because we are an export state. The question is, how do you pay for it? Now, in the past, as you know, it's always been with a user fee or a gas tax, however you want to describe that. There's not a great will right now in Congress to do that. There's not a will to raise taxes, and there's also a reality here that we're seeing that the gas tax doesn't have the biggest bang for the buck anymore. Partly because there's so many fuel-efficient vehicles out there, you just don't get that. And then also there's other vehicles out there, electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles. You've got fleets that are run on propane or natural gas. And a lot of these vehicles aren't paying into the road bill. Now, I think they need to. I think there needs to be equity out there. If you're going to use the roads, I think you should help pay for them, right? It's kind of a pay-to-play kind of scenario. So we'll be going back and trying this again. It's a matter of how you pay for it. It's also, to me, a matter of priorities. When we talk about a road bill, we think about roads and bridges, right? But sometimes that fund gets used for a lot of other things, like public art or bike paths. I love bikes, I love biking, I love art. But at the same time, if we are truly crumbling our roads and bridges, that money needs to be zeroed in on there. And another reason why the fuel tax is not on the table is because a lot of states are starting to do that on their own. You have up to 30 states who are either considering raising their state gas tax or have already. But I hear you. I've heard this at pretty much.
Are you familiar with? I think it's the state of Oregon or parts of Oregon where they've put some sort of chip in the vehicle that measures the miles, and they don't pay those people that. It's an experimental program, but those that participate don't pay any fuel tax at the pump.
Yeah. So
but
when
they pay on the
by the mile.
Yeah, by the mile.
Yeah. So what he's talking about is instead of funding the roads at the pump, you do it for the usage that you're on the road. So in the state of Oregon, and I like to watch these states do innovative things to see what works and what doesn't work, because oftentimes the federal government, when they do a one-size-fits-all approach, doesn't always work. And then you're kind of stuck with it. But in Oregon, they are putting a chip with the odometer, and for every mile they drive, at the end of a year maybe, they will get it scanned, and there will be, you'll pay per mile that you use. There's some privacy rights concerns going along with this, because So people say, well, if they are gonna know how many miles I go, then they're gonna know where I am at any given time. So there's some real privacy concerns there, but I think a lot of people are watching that to see if that's doable.
Interesting.
It is interesting.
You know, in
Interesting.
Oregon, it's illegal to fill up your car with gas at the pump. $1,500 fine.
In New Jersey as well.
Yeah, I found that out recently.
If you fill your car up,
I pulled up to the pump and I put my card in, picked up the thing, and they came and stopped me because it's illegal. You have to pay somebody to fill your car up.
oh, really? Wow.
So much for Oregon being forward thinking.
Wow, job opportunity.
We know at a pretty young age, don't we, here in rural Iowa, how to fill up a truck or a car.
Often.
We're pretty independent. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Does that help answer a little bit of your
Yes.
question too? Okay.
Perhaps the thing could be read every time you get your oil changed.
Some people don't ever do it.
Yeah, that's right.
Sir, SSDI, so, yeah.
Yes.
We have found out that, I think that in 2 years or 2.5 years, we're gonna have a problem with that not being funded properly. And this just goes to the broader point of Social Security and Medicare and look at the unfunded liabilities that are in there. And we need to make sure that these promises are kept. Now, a lot of people call this entitlements, but people have paid into these, and they deserve to get their funds back and make sure that Social Security, where it's SSDI or Medicare, that it is properly funded, because that promise was made and that promise needs to be kept. We're gonna need a bipartisan solution, and I kinda like to use the model that Ronald Reagan as president used on these issues, along with Tip O'Neill, who was a Democrat Speaker of the House I think it was from Massachusetts back in the 80s. They recognized that there was a problem, and the promise needed to be kept, and they took it out of politics, and they both went down in the White House, and both being Irishmen, they probably maybe had a Guinness beer. You kids don't know what that is. They talked about this issue in a serious way, and they proposed a solution, and both sides came together on it. So we need that leadership. I think that will is there in Congress right now to do a lot of these things, but there's not a lot of talk about it at the other end of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But when we get back, we have to deal with that issue along with some other ones, and that's one of the ones at the top of the list.
Do you think that'll happen prior to the presidential election?
Well, I hope it does, because I like to take on these issues sooner than later. And, you know, when you get into next year, which is going to be a very political year, because it's a presidential election year, as well as, you know, a third of the Senate's up for re-election and all of Congress. There's a tendency to shy away from tough issues, but I went to Washington and I believe you elected me to take on these issues. And you have to remember, there's 5 people in the U.S. Senate as well who are running for president, so who knows what can happen with these issues being politicized in a good or bad way at any given time, and maybe that's a good thing. We'll find out. Thank you. You bet. You're here to listen. Feel free to pipe up if you have any issue.
Okay.
Yeah. Just in general, states' rights. Yeah. Anybody know what the 10th Amendment is? Well, you're gonna, well, I'm going
Just started.
Yeah. You know, we have some pocket constitutions that we can send to your class, so I want to make sure that we get we know where to send these, but. You know, the federal government, there are certain things in the Constitution that the federal government does, and one of the big one is to make sure that we are protected, and make sure that we are protected from evil, that being anybody out there, any country, organization, individual who wants to take away any of our constitutional rights or liberties. But there's a lot of other things out there that the federal government is doing that I don't think necessarily needs to be done. That can be done at the state level, because I believe, and I think our founding fathers believe, that the decisions about government made closest to the people, closest to you at the local level, the state level, you're going to have better decisions made because there's more accountability. One issue that has come up, and I guess it can segue with the issue of education, is, as you know, the federal government has a U.S. Department of Education, and there's a law out there called No Child Left Behind. And that has become very frustrating for teachers, for administrators, for parents, and for students. And the voice of the people is being heard in Washington on this, because you have Republicans and Democrats coming together saying, you know, it may have been very well intentioned, but these federal one-size-fits-all approaches on education isn't working. It may not be a good thing. And so we passed a bill so far in Congress, and I don't like to be voting on federal education policy because I think it's a state issue, but we passed a bill to devolve power back to the states and the local communities to allow them to have more power in the classroom. I spoke with a teacher in Creston, and she spelled it all out to me. She said, almost crying, she said, under No Child Left Behind, she's become a tester and not so much a teacher anymore. Good intentions, I will say, by folks at the U.S. Department of Education, but they are not in the classroom. And they don't see your faces. They don't hear your voice. But teachers do. And teachers teach differently, and they want to teach. They don't want to be teaching to tests all the time. They want to be creative and teach to the classroom. And kids learn differently. They certainly do. So that's an example of how we're trying to return power back to the states on some issues.
Probably the biggest pocketbook issue coming up, though, is the ending of coal-fired generation of electricity, and that pocketbook issue for every American, especially lower income individuals.
So we have a regulatory process. So Congress passes laws, and you have an administration, any given administration, Republican or Democrat, they issue rules and regulations. I'm not anti-rules and regulations, so to speak, but I am against the overreaching and the lack of transparency and accountability with these rules and regulations. I think Congress needs to take control of this policy making and keep in mind that all states are different, and that if there's going to be this heavy-handedness of the federal government, it should come from Congress, because with Congress there is accountability, right? And what's that accountability? We call them elections. When these rules and regulations come out, it's a one-size-fits-all approach. A lot of the stakeholders aren't considered, whether that's manufacturers, farmers, county, state employees, local governments, small business owners. A lot of the time they're not consulted on what these rules and regs, what effect they can have on them. That's very disturbing. We passed a bill called the REINS Act before we left for Congress, before we left for our work period. REINS as in rein in government rules and regulations. It's pretty simple. It says that when you look at these rules and regs and their impact on the economy and on states, if they have a certain economic impact, then Congress has to vote on these rules and regulations. And I think it's good that Congress has to vote on that, because that's where there's accountability. We don't even know who is writing these rules and regulations many times. When I put my name on introduce a bill or an amendment, I got to put my name on it. When you take a test, you got to put your name up in the corner. You know, when you do business, you have to put your name on your product or on a contract. But when rules and regs come out, you don't know who behind the bureaucracy, it's a faceless and nameless at times, is doing this. And so we need better transparency there. And I have a bill coming out after we get back that says, it's called the Fingerprints Act. Basically it says when you issue rules and regulations, you got to put your name on it. So we know who's doing this, and there's better accountability there. I just think that's the way to go. The more sunshine we can have with our federal government, the better, because that transparency is so important. People say sunshine is the best disinfectant, and I believe that. But we're seeing it in a myriad of ways, the federal government doing more and more things that the state could be better served to do, in my opinion.
We don't want a heavy-handed Congress either.
No, yeah, you're right. But if they are, we have elections, right? And there's accountability there. I take your point.
And I think the president, I think the executive branch has usurped a lot of the powers of the Congress as well. You ought to feel the same way I do.
Yeah, oh yeah. We have 3 branches of government, and it's important that we remind those, each other, the executive reminding Congress, and Congress reminding the executive, and the courts certainly remind both the executive and legislative branch that there are 3 branches here. And that's a good thing, because if you give too much concentration of power to one branch, you're going to see some abuses, but there are checks and balances. Sometimes it's very frustrating at times, but elections help with that, and so does some of the tools that we have in Congress. Nurses healthcare. Now you're a registered nurse here,
Yes.
and you work at the county. Where do you work?
I am actually retired.
Okay.
I still practice as a parish nurse, as a volunteer, and then I'm assistant manager here. Those are my employments.
Okay. And you say an association just came out regarding.
The American Nurse Association,
Okay.
who is our overseer, kind of. They have a lot to do with whether or not I have a license.
Uh-huh.
And they have come out that nursing diagnoses are no longer going to be important.
And did you get the rationale for that?
It's too cumbersome. The nurses can't be with the patients and do the paperwork.
Well, I need to do more research on this and see what kind of nexus there is at the federal level.
Yeah.
But if this is coming kind of from the ground up, from the Nurses Association, they've got a better viewpoint and perspective of what's happening there than certainly I do or anyone in Congress.
Yeah.
So I'll have to learn from
But
them.
I just wonder how that's going to impact healthcare. So,
I don't know, but I do know that
probably.
when it comes to healthcare, I think we need to pay attention to the innovations and the differences between states and areas and states regarding the delivery of healthcare. In Iowa, I think we do a pretty good job. We've got the Affordable Care Act that has come out with new rules and regulations, and maybe this act, this new law is affecting cause and effect here. But I think we need to keep in mind the innovations and the needs in rural areas and how that delivery is different than urban areas.
Yeah.
And how very important it is too in our critical access hospitals. So I wrote down American Nurses Association. I'm going to go to the
I
website.
put my email on there.
You're way ahead of me.
And my last name is Young, so you won't
I
forget
took note of
it.
that. You must know this guy over here.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
He's my roommate.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. You're up.
Mine's on the Veterans Choice Act, but you've also touched on a couple of other things. I've heard rumor that, well, they're considering taking, if a veteran is receiving VA benefits and Social Security, allowing them to only have one, which we already have that problem. If a veteran is retired from the military, has a retirement but has been disabled by the military service, they can't receive their retired pay and their compensation at the same time or pension at the same time. So they're being already penalized for their military career and then their injury, like a workers' comp. That's considered basically that same way. So they're already being reduced on that. So rumor has it that they're trying to do the same thing. If they draw Social Security benefits, they're not going to be allowed to keep their VA benefits as well. So that's a concern.
Okay. Do you know
Because it's two different pots.
Do you know how to source this rumor to see if it's true, in fact, and where it would be coming from?
It has been coming from the legislature at the VA benefits.
So
Through
from Congress or through the
the
VA?
Veterans Benefits Program.
Okay.
Mhm.
So this.
Department of Veterans Affairs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is where we need to check.
Yeah,
that.
you need to check it through them, because they're looking at other ways of cutting or reducing the cost of the VA benefits that are being paid out. The other is the Veterans Choice Act. Veterans now have an opportunity, if they can't get into a VA appointment, to go outsourced, basically, if they're using the VA. Two things: not every veteran uses the VA hospital or is eligible to use the VA hospital. They stopped that several years ago. It's an income-based program, so the low-income or service-connected veterans are the only ones that are able to use a VA hospital. So we have veterans that have worked and aspired and done everything that they needed to do to better their lives. And if they didn't enroll by a certain time, they can't enroll and use the VA hospital.
How long has that been current law?
That's been since, oh gosh.
As long as you've remembered.
Well,
been
it
around?
was in, and then it came back, and they've changed it several times where they've allowed it and then they've reduced it. Now they got rid of the asset guideline and only went to income guidelines. So if you have too much income, you can't use it. So every year they kind of revamp it, but it's been for the last 8 years or so that they've not allowed every veteran to enroll into the VA.
Okay, this sounds like it's coming more out of the VA
It's out of the
department as well.
VA budget, yes, out of
Okay.
the Veterans Administration where they've changed that. But Congress supports it, legislators are supporting it because it's helping reduce their budgets, which is not fair to the veterans. They're being penalized. But with this Veterans Choice Act that they brought up 2 years ago, veterans, if they can't get an appointment at the VA, if they're enrolled, and they can't get an appointment within 30 days, they have to call a number, for one. If you're 85 years old, I mean, it's very convoluted with the Veterans Choice Act because it's not a blanket card. They send you a card, but the card isn't good for anything but other than an 800 number that you have to call and request the appointment. But the VA hospital has to set up the criteria and authorization. So if I wanted to go down here to the clinic down here, if that clinic isn't signed up to use the VA or being paid by the VA, that veteran can't use that. So they're having to still drive to another facility, so they're not localized in their own community. So veterans can't even use it within their own community without having to go through a phone tree of system. So it's got some issues and problems under the Choice Act. Plus they're double billed. They may go to that clinic and they'll receive a bill, and then since the VA referred them, they'll get sent down there as well.
Sounds like you and I need
We need to talk.
to talk.
In regard to
Because I want to pick your
veterans.
brain on some things and have my veteran staff members in there as well. Hey, thanks everybody for
Sounds
coming
like
by.
the bell. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Be
brings
good.
in 4 minutes.
Bye.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
Take care. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Have a good
much.
day.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I'll get you, there's also some legislation in there. I work for the county,
Yeah.
and we do federal benefits. We apply for benefits for veterans. We are an arm of government, but we have no access to veterans' information. You were talking about it needs to be the closest to where the veteran lives. We're 99 counties in Iowa. We have 99 offices. Not every state runs this way, but the state of Iowa, thank goodness, instituted that every county should have a county service officer. We're federally accredited by the VA, so we have to go through an accreditation process so we can file for benefits for veterans. But the county pays our bill. The federal government only tells us what to do and how to do it. Gives us our training, gives us our education, but the county pays that. We file for these benefits in the state of Iowa. And we should have access to the records so we can find out what they're doing. We are kind of another check and balance for the federal government. So when a veteran gets an award, we review those awards to make sure they've complied with the regulations and requirements that they're supposed to do. And we assist them as an advocate. We don't work for the veteran, for the VA, but we work for the veteran. And we make sure they're accountable. But we can't get access to the records. We can't call up.
Even if
on
a
the-
veteran gives you permission?
There's a process. The VA has an issue. The VA has the power of attorney, which is a service organization. The DAV, the American Legion, but you have to be accredited with them, which several of us in the county, I'm accredited with 5 of them. I have to go through their testing. I have to go through all of that to become accredited, cross-accredited with them. But the issue is you're a veteran and you walk in the door and you don't have this power of attorney signed, you have nothing, I can't call up and find out that information if the veteran has any benefits whatsoever. Plus, we're doing all the work. We have a piece of legislation in, and I'll get that forwarded to David, in regard to an accountability, plus the federal government assisting us with funding to keep us going and to assist that veteran on the state level and the county level.
Okay.
So, and we work that through the National Association of Counties. We have it through them as well, some legislation in there.
I look forward to, we can talk further about this and getting the information that you want us to have. And also, Congress has recognized some of the things that have been going on in the Veterans Affairs Administration for a long time. And it hasn't just been this administration, but past administrations, regarding some accountability and almost perverse incentives in a way with trying to get their case workers, particularly we saw the instance down in Phoenix, to get cases done and see veterans and take care of them, but they really weren't. They were putting a lot of files of cases in closets and in drawers and disregarding what was happening with our veterans and their needs. And so we had whistleblowers blow the whistle on this, and for good reason, because our veterans were not, that promise was being broken to them. We passed a bill to allow the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to fire people who do this and make it easier to get rid of people who are not taking care of our veterans and to protect those whistleblowers who are standing up for them. And also we took away that bonus structure because that was such a perverse incentive. So I want to make sure that you knew that had been addressed. Our veterans deserve the best. They put their life on the line for us. And you know, you mentioned Van Meter. That's where Iowa Veteran Cemetery is, where I'm from, and I drive by that cemetery. Sometimes I pull up in there and sit and stare at the flag and those graves, and we've had many events there. So if you ever get the opportunity, stop by there at the Iowa Veteran Cemetery. It's hallowed ground. And thanks for what you do for our veterans.
No problem.
I talked a little bit about Social Security. I wonder if that helped answer some of your questions, but
I just want to know what's going to happen to it.
well, we're going to come together and we're going to make sure that it's there and that promise is made. And it's got to be bipartisan, and we need leadership from the White House, whoever's in power. Congress they want to do something, they're kind of reticent, I think, at times, if there's not going to be some help at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, because we got to come together on this. But, you know, you've got everybody in here. We have the opportunity to meet the next president of the United States, and you know, they're running all around our counties, and we want to make sure that they will make it a priority to make sure that that promise is kept. We just celebrated the 80th anniversary of Social Security a few weeks ago, and I went to that. AARP had a birthday party, 80th anniversary, and you know, I can remember the times when my grandfather passed away and my grandmother really needed that. And it was there for her, and she paid into it, and that promise was kept, and we need to keep that promise going. So, thanks for bringing that up and for being here. You bet. The educators.
Yeah, this is not really one of my education questions,
Sure.
but you mentioned to her this was a responsibility of the executive branch as opposed to the legislative branch, the Social Security.
Oh, I didn't say it was a responsibility, but they need to, they've got the president has the bully pulpit, and if he or she is not driving that agenda and making it a priority, it's tough to get Congress to act on something. It's kind of like tax simplification and reform right now. I think there's a will in Congress, but if there's not a will at the other end and they're not making it a priority, unfortunately, Congress kind of sits on its feet or sits on its hands. But we got to get to it, some of these big issues. And I think personally, that Congress should just do it anyway, and do their job and just address the issues and kind of force any president's hand to help bring them to the table as well. But I'm not trying to make it partisan, and it shouldn't be partisan. I mean, we've had other presidents too, and on either side of the aisle, who've not made it a priority.
With regard to education, I have a couple of questions, and one of them has to do with, you had mentioned the teacher in Creston talking about being too much of the testing. And Riverside, in spite of being selected by U.S. News as one of the top high schools for 2014 and 2015, is for the first year selected as a SINA 1 school, which by the testing, and I'm sure you know, is a school in need of improvement by No Child Left Behind. I'm wondering where your stand is on the elimination or replacement of No Child Left Behind.
Well, that's what the Student Success Act was that we passed earlier on this year. It just simply gave more power to the states to have that flexibility. No Child Left Behind, on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, have said the intentions were good, but the micromanagement of the classrooms by the federal government and some of these mandates have just been too heavy-handed. So we want, now if school districts or teachers or administrators like some of the things going on in No Child Left Behind, that flexibility can still be there. But there may be some other things that the classrooms and teachers want to do with their classes, and we want to give that flexibility. We want to have standards and allow, all classrooms are different, allow them to meet those standards in a way that they see fit.
I wonder why Iowa has not, at least to my awareness, has not had any discussion about this new flexibility with No Child Left Behind, because it seems to us it's business as usual.
Well, I've met with the ISEA, Iowa, and the NEA here in Iowa, and had some fruitful discussions about this. There's also a Senate bill that passed as well, and they'll go to conference, and we'll see what we can get to the president, just to give states more flexibility, because that's what they're asking for. That's what teachers and administrators are asking for, some more flexibility on some of these things.
Just from my understanding now, the law has not actually changed. I mean, the president didn't sign the bill, did he?
No.
So we
So the law's
still
still the same.
are
No Child-
under
yeah.
No Child Left
We're
Behind.
still under No Child Left Behind.
And the Student Success Act has passed both houses and is now sitting on the president's desk?
It's passed the House and the Senate, and so then they need to come together in what they call a conference committee and kind of reconcile the differences, because the House and the Senate bill are not exactly the same.
I see. So nothing has reached the...
Nothing's reached the
executive-
president's desk yet, and if you want more information on the Student Success Act, section by section, be glad to get it to you.
Please, I left
You
my
bet.
email there as well.
You bet.
My other question is, and I appreciate your comments about keeping promises, because I think that's important, whether it be nationally or for Representative Forstall or for myself, being a government employee as well. But in January, there was a bipartisan committee, and I'm not sure whether it was House or the Senate, that passed the IDEA Full Funding Act.
Individual with Disabilities Education Act.
Which basically, when IDEA came through, the federal government said they would support this at a level of 40%, and they never have. Currently, it's somewhere around 16, and this is the last thing that I read. And this said that it would fund special education as the federal government had promised in the beginning. I'd like to know what your opinion is on that.
You say that passed this year in Congress?
It was introduced.
Introduced, okay. There was a nexus with when we passed the Student Success Act, which had some IDA provisions in it regarding its funding. I want to check and see what that exactly was.
Okay.
And how it affects children in districts with children with disabilities.
Okay.
There may have been a provision in there that allowed funding to follow and be portable with kids with disabilities if they weren't getting the education that they thought they needed, the attention they needed in certain areas. So I want to let you know that.
Hopefully you're not making special education more expensive for us than with the bill than less expensive, because that is definitely a problem with us at the educational level, we are left with what the state does not support us with, often turning to our taxpayers and saying, fund the difference. And it's growing, that amount is growing.
And you need to know ahead of time how many kids are gonna be in your classroom that have disabilities, because you do planning by hiring teachers and staff for that. But with the portability, I'm not sure how much notice it can give you, because a parent may be able to take their child out of the classroom at any given time under the bill that we passed. But I need to check on that for you, and I know you're concerned about it
Okay.
in a big way. So thank you. And you left your card with us?
I put the information
Okay.
there, I'll
Okay.
leave a business card, and I wrote the questions down, so I'll leave those as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm good.
You're good? Okay. Let me give you, well, hello. How are you? Good morning. Any particular issue you want to talk about? I wanted to just give folks a little heads up about what we're going to be facing when we get back after Labor Day. You've heard of the Iran agreement? Well, hi. How are you? And how are you? You're awesome. Yeah, you are.
We can sneak in a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No worries.
What's
My
your
name
name?
is Allison.
Hey, Allison.
This is my son, Zeke.
Hello, Zeke.
Well, first of all, thank you. Your office did a lot. Vana helped us out to get his U.S. citizenship. He and his brother are adopted from Ethiopia. So we faced some immigration struggles.
Yeah.
His process actually took 2 full years, and with no less than 8 congressional liaison interventions. We were out of the country. We're kind of an unusual case, but his brother was actually born with a severe cleft lip and palate. And at the embassy in Ethiopia, he was denied a visitor's visa to come to the U.S. for medical care. And we were kind of stuck there for 4 months, finalizing his citizenship through Kenya. And immigration system is broken.
It's very broken.
I think everyone knows.
Yeah.
But for an American citizen trying to bring my children to this country, it's been extremely difficult. It's been 4 years of paperwork and, oh, there was a problem, and, oh, you didn't include this paper that we didn't list on the list. And every step has been like that. So what can we do?
You know, the legal, being law-abiding, going through the right steps can be very, very frustrating. My sister-in-law, it took her about 10 years to get through the process. Very, very frustrated. 40% of the people here in America, here illegally, it's because of the frustration, I think, with the legal system. They just overstayed their visas. Some of them decided they didn't even want to go through that process because it's so burdensome. It can take years and years and years. When it comes to simplification or reform, you know, we've had the Senate pass a big immigration bill 2 years ago, which was this big, and it was, you never know what's in it.
It had a 2-line clause in it that would have allowed the children of adopted children of U.S. citizens to become citizens automatically. It saved us headaches and many thousands of dollars.
Now, that provision probably could have gotten into another slimmer bill. I want to tackle immigration by separating out the issues within it. Border control, employment practices, enforcement of current law, legal simplification and reform. That's how I think that we should do it. But I'm glad to see him here. He's got his iPad, so he's happy, right?
He's taking some in. But yeah, and I was definitely grateful for the congressional help that we received. Just in going through every step of the process, something like TurboTax, where it gives you little smiley faces and tells you what you need, and you can't go to the next step unless you meet all the boxes. Something that simple would go so far. Take that with you to Washington, but
Well,
that level of
I
interface.
would like it if the federal government worked in some ways a little bit more like a business, a lot quicker, because there's accountability there and there's a bottom line. But we got to recognize at the same time that government and business, they're 2 totally different things. But there are some things that
That's a really good example.
government can take some
because
lessons.
In the case of taxes, dealing with the IRS is almost impossible. Understanding IRS code is almost impossible. So what do? We turn to companies like TurboTax. It makes it simpler. So maybe there should be turbo immigration.
Contact it out for the president.
Yeah.
When we get back, we're going to be dealing with the Iran agreement. Maybe you've heard a little bit about that. But as you know, the administration came to the table with an agreement with the P5 countries, Russia, Canada, France, the UK, and Germany, to try to bring Iran into peaceful status and an ally at some point. I don't know if any of you read this agreement. It's 109 pages. It's on our website. And I read it because if I was going to vote on this, I thought, well, I should do my due diligence and read this and study it on its merits. I had an open mind, asked a lot of questions, and the big problems I had with it is the whole inspection process to verify really if Iran is complying and they're not sneaking around and trying to enhance its nuclear capabilities to build a nuclear bomb. And we don't have that anytime, any place, anyhow, anywhere inspections. It can take 3 weeks to go in there and take a look. And in 3 weeks you can do a lot. You can move things around, you can hide things. And Iran has broken a lot of agreements in the past that it's been on, and so I looked at this through the lens of trust. Ronald Reagan was a trust and verify kind of guy, and for the most part I am too, but in this instance I think it's a verify and then trust. Iran is still chanting death to America. They're intent on destroying Israel. They funded Hezbollah and the Hamas, and they're still listed as a state sponsor of terrorism since 1984 they have, and we're going to give them $150 billion to spend. Now I want you to know that that's not taxpayer funds. They've had assets that have been frozen for a long time, and they're going to be unfrozen. And they're going to be able to spend that on whatever they want. There's not a lot of transparency and accountability. They can buy intercontinental ballistic missiles. They can build an air defense shield. They can fund other groups. But we have a vote coming up. I'm going to vote for the resolution of disapproval and against the agreement. On what I saw, I think we need to go back and put in sanctions and enhance sanctions and go back to the negotiating table. We want to try diplomatic means, first and foremost. That's probably the best place to start. But there's a side agreement that nobody's read between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. And I visited with the IAEA in a bipartisan way with some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. We just thought it was very important to try to figure out what's in this side agreement that nobody can read. Because if we're going to be voting on an agreement where there's a side agreement that could influence that, we need to have that transparency and know what's in there. And so we didn't get that agreement, that side agreement. And so I'm going to be voting for the resolution of disapproval. And we'll have that vote probably mid-September. You've heard a lot about that probably. If Iran is found, if this agreement goes forward and Iran is found to violate it, they say there's some snapback provisions where we can snap back and put the sanctions on, but that may be too late. We can put our sanctions on, but some of those other countries who may be in doing business with Iran and investing in them, they could be in too deep and not want to comply. And how do we make them comply? It'd be very difficult. So, things to think about.
Well, I haven't read that agreement, but I have my own homework to do. So I'm going to trust you on that. And from what I've heard, I guess you're on the right.
And I applaud the president for trying diplomatic means, as well as Secretaries Kerry and Munoz and Liu. Why not start there? But I think there's more questions that are unanswered.
But what I heard you say, and I want to make sure, because lots of times on the news we get one side or another, and it's only half the story, frankly. But the 150 billion that you're talking about is actually their money.
Yeah.
That's going to be returned to them.
Yeah, it's been frozen
Mm-hmm.
in accounts around the world.
Mm-hmm. So we're not giving them 150 billion. We're returning money that was theirs.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's not taxpayer funds. We're allowing them to tap into their unfrozen assets. Yeah.
You'd think they could kind of meet that money out rather than just opening the door to the bank vault and just crack it a little bit and say, okay, you get $1 billion this year, and if you're nice, you might get 2 next year. I don't know if that's in the agreement or not.
Well, it's not. Those would be some of the things that I would
Yeah.
want to consider putting on the table on an agreement. But the first thing that I would have put on the table, or even before getting to the table, I would have said, if you're serious about this, you're going to release the hostages, American hostages that you have. If you're really serious, before you can get to the table, and that was not in the cards. Anything
You guys
else?
behind you.
Well, you snuck in here. How are you? David Young.
Yes.
Marty Rican.
Hey, any other issues you want to bring up or talk about that are important to you? If not, I'll just linger around here and I may have a donut myself.
I'm kind of curious about your opinion on the waters of the U.S.
Oh, sure.
You know, I know that there's, hopefully some of the rulemaking is going to be happening very soon because people are very nervous about how that's going to impact producers, how it's going to impact conservation efforts. I don't really have a specific question. I'm just wondering, you know, what your opinion is on this and how you foresee this impacting Western Iowa as well as other parts of the United States.
Sure. She's talking about a rule that the EPA has rolled out called Waters of the USA, and it redefines water under the Clean Water Act in ways that could open up the EPA to have a blanket regime of regulations across Iowa agriculture, but not just agriculture, any kind of construction or development that a town or a city wants to partake in. I'm against the rule, and we have a power in Congress called the power of the purse. Now, I'm on the House Appropriations Committee. I'm on the Agriculture Subcommittee, Homeland Security Subcommittee, and Transportation Subcommittee. And we passed the Interior Appropriations Bill, and we withheld funding in it for the EPA to promulgate, to go forward with this rule. And we passed the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill and withheld funding from the Army Corps of Engineers to promulgate, to go forward with this rule. We want the EPA to drop this and go back to square one, because they're likely to still try to do something. But we want to make sure that they consult with stakeholders. And who are stakeholders? Counties, cities, manufacturers, agriculture community, developers. We want to make sure that the people are heard and that there's a good dialogue back and forth between those who are wanting to do these regulations. And I'm just not sure that they understand the impact that this can have on Iowa agriculture. I mean, technically, the front ditch of your farm, if it floods, that could be perceived as a navigable waterway by the EPA. And you could have the EPA showing up on your farm and declaring it a wetland. Can you
Well,
imagine?
this goes back to what I was talking about, and I was thinking of the waters of the U.S.
Yeah.
when I brought up my topics. But where in the Constitution does it say that the federal government has control over the ditches of the United States?
Well, it doesn't, and that's why we're fighting this.
And not only that, but, I mean, when we look at the whole body of federal law, and the Constitution is only that thick, I mean, all of this is derived by some machinations of the mind, and that's what we need to put a hold on, is this promulgation of all these laws that integrate with every part of the activity of the economy and of people's lives.
And Congress has abrogated some of its authority on this, and the most dangerous line sometimes at the end of any bill is the line that reads, "And the Secretary of such agency shall issue rules and regs pertinent to this act." We need to take that back, and that's why we passed that Reins Act, to try to bring it back.
Well, in Iowa, every year we publish the laws of Iowa. We don't bother publishing all the rules. That's a loose leaf notebook.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the webpage, because you can't keep track of them.
So we're seeking to withhold funding for this rule.
Okay.
And
You know, I think it's
there's
a
a
real
lawsuit right
challenge.
now as well that's already come out against the EPA on this, so we may see something happen
I
in the
think,
courts.
maybe Scotty can back me up on this. I don't think the Army Corps was even involved in any of this writing the rules, and wouldn't they be engaged in some of the enforcement also?
And that's why we withheld funding from the Army Corps of Engineers in case the EPA wanted to work with them to backdoor this through another
Okay.
agency. We wanted to cover the bases.
I think, you know, my strong belief is that farmers and agricultural producers are inherently conservation-minded. They have to be, because
It's their livelihood.
the soil is their livelihood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I work with Golden Hills Resource Conservation Development, and so we're trying to find that balance between, we do want to conserve the quality of our water, we do want to conserve the quality of our land. However, what we're finding is for those landowners that want to institute conservation practices, there's not enough resources, and there's so many hoops to jump through to be able to voluntarily implement some of this, that it's almost counterproductive. And so, you know, how do you find that balance? And maybe it is an issue of the local control that you were speaking of earlier, that we know best how to remediate some of the damages that we have from runoff and from erosion, and so, you know, it's a messy issue, but.
And I think the more local control, the better. I think there's better accountability there, because if there are bad practices, I think the citizens and the neighbors will take notice of that and let their neighbors know. But at the federal level, there seems to be a mentality of a one-size-fits-all approach, and the thought is that every county and every farm here is the same in its landscape and the same in its methods and practices in farming, and it's not, and we know that. Well, thanks for coming, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. We've got donuts and coffee. If you didn't get any, please get some, and I want to make sure that you leave your information. If you have any specific questions you didn't get answered, we want to do that. And it's an honor to see you, and I'll see you again here. We'll be doing some parades around here on Labor Day. Where are we going to be?
Neola?
Neola?
and Essex.
In Essex, so looking forward to that. Hey Zeke, thanks for being here. Yeah, thank you.